Imagine this. You're standing under the blistering Egyptian sun 3,000 years ago. The Nile is glimmering in the distance, but you're not thinking about water. You're thinking about food. Because even back then, long before pizza, burgers, or potato chips, people still had cravings. And the ancient Egyptians? They basically invented junk food before they even invented forks. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wait, ancient junk food? That sounds like a history class I never signed up for. But trust me, this isn't the boring textbook version. This is about snacks that were crunchy, sticky, chewy, sometimes sandy, and always essential for survival. These weren't just meals. They were bribes, wages, currency, and in some cases, divine offerings. Food wasn't just fuel, it was destiny. So, let's take you there. Picture yourself not as a mighty pharaoh or high priest, but as an ordinary Egyptian. A laborer, sweating in a linen kilt, probably with a backache, definitely with a sunburn, and absolutely starving after hauling mud bricks for hours. What's the first thing you grab? Bread. But hold on, don't imagine a soft French baguette or a fluffy slice of brioche. No, Egyptian bread was, let's call it, character building. It was flat, heavy, and gritty enough to make your dentist cry. Why? Because grinding grain meant grinding stone literally. They used sandstone grinders that shed tiny particles into the flour. Every bite came with a bonus crunch, and not the satisfying potato chip kind. More like chewing on desert gravel. Imagine biting into a sandwich and wondering, was that barley or quartz? Still, bread was everything. It wasn't just food, it was the backbone of their diet, the base of their food pyramid, and probably part of the actual pyramids too. Workers ate it for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and whenever they felt like collapsing from heat stroke. It was so central to life that loaves were even placed in tombs, because apparently the afterlife demanded carbs too. And Egyptians got creative. Bread wasn't always boring. Some loaves were shaped like birds, cobras, or fish, because nothing says festive like biting the head off a bread duck. Some were flavored with coriander, dates, or even beer foam. Yes, beer foam bread. Because somebody in ancient Egypt clearly looked at their pint and thought, what if carbs, but extra intoxicating? But wait, you're thirsty, right? The sun is blazing, the Nile looks suspicious, and you've seen what floats downstream. So do you drink water? Absolutely not. Water was risky business. Instead, like every sensible Egyptian, you reach for the national beverage, beer. Now, erase whatever picture you just formed in your head. This isn't a frosty pilsner with a slice of lime. Egyptian beer was chunky, thick, cloudy, something you didn't sip so much as chew. It was made by soaking half-baked loaves of bread in water, leaving it to ferment with wild yeast, and then straining it if the brewer was feeling fancy that day. Spoiler, most weren't, so your drink arrived warm, foamy, and full of mysterious floaters. Bread? Barley? Something else? Who knows? Picture yourself raising the jug, taking a swig, and instantly questioning your life choices. The texture? A swamp smoothie. The taste? Sour, tangy, and suspiciously earthy. And yet, you drink. Why? Because it was safer than water, it filled you up, and let's be honest, it got you buzzed. Egyptians loved their beers so much that workers were often paid in it. 4 liters a day if you were building pyramids. Imagine finishing your shift slightly tipsy, full of carbs, and still covered in dust. Congratulations, you just lived like an ancient construction worker. And it wasn't just for commoners. Beer was sacred. Temples brewed their own batches, some for rituals, some for festivals, and some just for the priests, who clearly knew how to party. There was even a goddess of beer, Teninit, protector of childbirth and brews. Because apparently Egyptians believed life's two biggest challenges, delivering babies and drinking chunky beer, deserved the same divine supervision. But here's the thing. Egyptians didn't just consume bread and beer, they practically worshipped them. Bread was a symbol of stability, the daily grind, literally, and the key to surviving famine. Beer was joy, ritual, and wages. Together, they formed the heartbeat of Egyptian life. And though they might make your modern stomach protest, back then, they were irresistible. So, you've survived your stone-filled bread and your chewable beer. You're buzzing slightly, your teeth are already regretting life, and your belly is begging for something sweet. But this is just the beginning, because what comes next? That's where Egyptian snacking gets truly outrageous. And trust me, you're not ready for what's about to hit your taste buds. All right, so you've chewed your way through a loaf of bread dense enough to qualify as building material, and you've washed it down with a jug of foamy bread soup beer. Your jaw is sore, your stomach is confused, but your sweet tooth? Oh, it's wide awake. And lucky for you, ancient Egyptians had a serious thing for sugar rushes. Enter honey. Now, honey wasn't just food, it was liquid gold. Sticky, sweet, dangerously addictive, and blessed by the gods themselves. Bees were sacred to Ra, the sun god, which basically meant every drop of honey was like eating sunlight with calories. Egyptians didn't just drizzle honey on things, they drowned food in it. If a dessert didn't glue your teeth together, it wasn't Egyptian enough. Picture the scene. You're wandering through a bustling marketplace. The air smells like sweat, grain, and roasted fish. Suddenly, a vendor hands you something warm, golden, and dripping. It's fried dough, soaked in honey, possibly shaped like a bird, because Egyptians had a thing for animal-shaped carbs. You bite in, crunchy outside, soft inside, and then boom. Your entire mouth floods with sugar. It's glorious. It's painful. It's basically the ancient Twinkie, minus the preservatives. But honey wasn't limited to festival treats. Oh no, it was everywhere. Weddings, honey cakes. Funerals, honey cakes. Religious rituals. You guessed it, honey cakes. If your neighbor's cat died, there was probably honey cake. Egyptians had this one dessert that was basically a ball of fried dough dipped so heavily in honey it could double as an adhesive. Imagine eating something so sticky that you can't open your jaw properly for 5 minutes. But do you stop? Absolutely not. You eat 2 more. And then there were dates. Not the romantic kind, though, to be fair. Offering someone a basket of dates back then might have worked better than poetry. These were the wrinkly, caramel-flavored, energy-packed fruits that grew like candy straight from desert trees. Egyptians devoured them in frankly suspicious amounts. Fresh, dried, mashed into paste, stuffed with nuts, dunked in honey, or fermented into syrup so thick it made molasses look like water. You pick one up, it looks questionable. Wrinkled, squishy, vaguely like something you should compost. But the moment you bite in, bam, sugar overload. Your pupils dilate, your heart races, and suddenly you're ready to build another pyramid single-handedly. Ancient Egyptians used dates as energy bars, love offerings, laxatives, and sometimes building glue. They were basically the duct tape of ancient snacks. But here's the catch. Dates are dangerously addictive. You swear you'll have just one. Then 5 minutes later, you've eaten half a basket. Your stomach is staging a rebellion, and a nearby ibis bird is giving you judgmental side-eye. Egyptians knew this feeling well. Medical papyri even listed dates as remedies for sadness, constipation, and general crankiness. Translation: feeling moody? Eat more dates. Honestly, not terrible advice. And if you thought honey bombs and dates were indulgent, wait until you hit an Egyptian festival. Festival days were chaos in the best way. Picture music blasting from temple drums, priests chanting, dancers twirling, cats strutting around like they owned the place, which, to be fair, they did. And in the middle of it all, food stalls. There were honey cakes shaped like ankhs, date fritters sizzling on hot stones, roasted goose legs for the elite, and gritty raisin bread for everyone else. Children sprinted past, sticky-faced and hyper from too much sugar. Meanwhile, you spot something incredible, a turnover oozing with fig paste, fried in precious sesame oil. You bite into it, and for a brief, transcendent moment, you understand why Egyptians built temples. This wasn't food. This was religion. Festivals were the rare times Egyptians really let loose with food. Normally, life was grain-based, simple, and a little depressing. But during festivals, moderation went out the window. Workers double-fisted honey buns. Priests pretended not to notice teenagers sneaking beer behind temples, and everyone left with sugar crashes so intense they probably needed divine intervention. But here's the wild part. These weren't just random snacks. They were symbols. Honey represented divinity. Dates meant abundance. Fritters fried in oil. That was wealth on display because sesame oil was rarer than good Wi-Fi in the desert. To eat festival food was to step outside daily survival and taste luxury. For one night, even the poorest laborer could pretend life was a banquet. So here you are, sticky fingers, buzzing from sugar, slightly tipsy from bread beer, and staring at a fried pastry like it's the Holy Grail. Your body is begging you to stop, but your heart is saying, one more bite. And just when you think you've peaked, Egypt whispers, not so fast. We've got tiger nut pastries, lotus root snacks, and even dried fish jerky waiting for you. And trust me, this next course, it's going to test your jaw, your stomach, and maybe even your faith in humanity. So far, you've tackled gritty bread, swampy beer, honey bombs, and sugar-dripping dates. You're buzzing, sticky, and possibly questioning your life choices. But here's the thing, ancient Egypt wasn't done inventing questionable snacks. If carbs and sugar weren't enough, they also gave the world treats so strange and so dense they could double as building supplies. Let's start with the tiger nut. First of all, there are no tigers in Egypt. Not then, not now. Tiger nuts aren't even nuts. They're little tubers, basically wrinkly root vegetables that look like shriveled marbles, but somehow ended up on the dessert menu. Marketing in the Bronze Age was wild. Egyptians adored these things. They roasted them, ground them into flour, mashed them into paste, or mixed them with honey to make dense little pastries. Imagine a snack ball that was part cookie, part energy bar, part dental hazard. They were crunchy, chewy, sticky, and weirdly floral. Basically, nature's granola bar, if granola bars were designed to survive the apocalypse. But the real magic was cultural. Tiger nut pastries weren't just for peasants. Nobles served them at banquets alongside wine and roasted meats. Priests offered them to the gods. And the working class? They got the economy version, slightly burnt, less honey, more grit. One recipe even included baking mashed tiger nuts with honey in clay molds, then finishing with a drizzle of date syrup. It was less dessert and more sugar-coated regret. Still, tiger nut snacks were beloved. Tomb paintings actually show trays of them being offered to the dead. Imagine being so obsessed with a pastry that you demand to eat it for eternity. That's commitment. But let's be real, these things were heavy. You thought you could eat 6? Cute. After 2, your stomach's already planning its revenge. After 3, your jaw feels like you've chewed through a papyrus scroll. After 4, you're lying in the shade of a mud brick wall, promising the gods you'll never do this again, until tomorrow when you inevitably do. Because somehow, despite the regret, tiger nut pastries tasted like joy preserved in sugar. All right, moving on. Ever heard of lotus chips? Now, the lotus flower was a huge deal in Egypt. It symbolized rebirth, sunrises, and probably half the tattoos in Thebes. Naturally, Egyptians figured out a way to eat it. Specifically, the root. Slice it thin, dry it, maybe toast it, and suddenly you've got ancient kale chips minus the Instagram posts. Lotus root snacks weren't deep fried. Oil was way too expensive. But clever vendors basted them in date syrup or dusted them with spices. The result? A crispy, earthy chip that was equal parts interesting and questionable. Some batches tasted sweet and nutty. Others, like incense with an identity crisis. But people loved them. They were light, portable, and unlike tiger nut pastries, they didn't anchor themselves in your intestines for 3 days. Kids liked them because the slices had little holes like edible wagon wheels. Adults liked them because they were different from endless bread. And priests liked them because eating lotus chips felt vaguely spiritual, even if the flavor leaned more burnt papyrus than divine nectar. Now, just when you're thinking Egypt's snack game couldn't get stranger, oh, it does. Picture this. You're walking through a riverside market. Something smells like a mix of ocean breeze, cat food, and regret. You follow the scent to a stall where a grinning vendor offers you what looks suspiciously like a dried sandal. Surprise, it's fish jerky. That's right. Egyptians dried fish in the sun, salted it, maybe rubbed it with herbs, and sold it as a snack. The result was tough, chewy, and salty enough to pickle your tongue. Think beef jerky, but wetter, fishier, and sprinkled with sand for texture. You bite into it and instantly regret your choices, but then you keep chewing because somehow it's addictive. Dried fish snacks weren't fancy. They weren't sacred. They were practical. No refrigeration, no problem. Just dry the fish until it's basically immortal, then gnaw on it until your teeth give up. It was portable protein for soldiers, laborers, and unlucky travelers who couldn't find dates or honey cakes. And here's the kicker. Despite the smell, people loved it. They carried fish jerky in pouches, ate it on the road, and even offered it in tombs. Imagine being mummified with your personal stash of dried fish, just in case eternity made you peckish. So, let's recap. You've had tiger nut pastries that doubled as bricks, lotus chips that tasted like philosophy homework, and dried fish jerky that smelled like divine punishment. At this point, your stomach is less an organ and more a museum exhibit. But guess what? you're still not done. Because Egypt had one more trick: snacks that mixed bread and beer into the same dish. Yes, soggy, boozy flatbread was a thing. And it was shockingly delicious, but that story we'll save for the next part. So far, you've survived stone-filled bread, swamp beer, honey bombs, tiger nut bricks, and dried fish that smelled like Poseidon's dirty laundry. By now, your ancient Egyptian stomach is basically an archaeological test site. But Egypt, in its eternal wisdom, wasn't finished messing with your digestive system. Nope, it had more delicacies waiting, ones that combined carbs, booze, and enough sugar to fuel the afterlife. Let's start with one of the weirdest ideas ever: bread dipped in beer. Sounds innocent, right? Like a pretzel and a pint. Wrong. This was soggy flatbread soaked in Egypt's infamous chunky beer and eaten like a cross between soup and regret. Imagine tearing off a piece of stale bread, dunking it into warm, foamy, semi-fermented barley sludge, and then chewing it while priests look on approvingly. That's beer bread. And here's the wild thing: it was comforting. Gross, yes, but also strangely satisfying. The soggy bread took on a tangy, earthy funk that somehow worked. Workers ate it after long shifts. Scribes ate it while trying to decode hieroglyphics that probably read, "Seriously, don't eat this." Sometimes the bread was fresh. Sometimes it was so stale you could use it as a weapon. Either way, dunking it in beer turned it into edible mush. Think of it as Egypt's version of nachos, only without cheese, Galapagos, or dignity. But maybe you want something sweeter. Enter nutcakes. Now, before you get too excited, let's clear something up. These weren't fluffy cupcakes with almonds and frosting. Egyptian nutcakes were barley patties stuck together with fig paste, honey, and whatever crunchy stuff was lying around. Sometimes actual nuts, yes. Other times, seeds, pebbles, mystery crunch. You never really knew. Still, nutcakes were loved. They showed up everywhere, from temple offerings to construction site lunch sacks. Workers munched on them for energy. Priests presented them to gods. Pharaohs probably had fancier versions with imported cinnamon or exotic nuts. Poor folks. Their nutcakes had more sand than nuts, but hey, sugar is sugar. The best part? Egyptians shaped nutcakes into little gods, ankhs, or sacred animals. Cute, symbolic, and 100% edible. Imagine biting into a mini pastry shaped like a goddess and thinking, "Sorry, Hathor, but you taste amazing." All right, ready for the heavy hitter? Fig bricks. Yes, you heard that right. Fig bricks. These were exactly what they sound like: dense, rectangular slabs of mashed figs, sometimes mixed with barley or dates, then pressed into shapes that looked suspiciously like construction material. Archaeologists have literally found some that survived thousands of years, still recognizable. That's not food. That's a building supply that just happens to be chewable. Eating one was an experience. The flavor? Sweet, rich, and caramel-like. The texture? Sticky, gritty, and determined to live in your molars until the next dynasty. You couldn't just eat a fig brick. You had to wrestle it. Every bite took effort, like gnawing through ambition. But people loved them because they were portable, filling, and packed with energy. Soldiers carried them. Farmers carried them. Pharaohs probably had deluxe versions that didn't double as masonry. And if fig bricks weren't sticky enough for you, Egypt had an even more dangerous weapon: date syrup. Now, Picture syrup so thick it moves slower than a tax collector in July. This stuff clung to everything: bread, fingers, tunics, cats, your very soul. Vendors poured it over figs, drizzled it on bread, or just handed you a glob to lick off your hand. Calling it poured is generous. It oozed like lava. But oh, the taste! Rich, deep, almost spicy. Like someone condensed an entire orchard into one bite and then dared you to chew through it. Egyptians believed it was medicine, preservative, and dessert all rolled into one. Healers recommended it for digestion, energy, or maybe just as a punishment disguised as a cure. And here's the kicker: portion control didn't exist. If it wasn't dripping, you weren't doing it right. Imagine walking around with sticky elbows, a syrup-soaked tunic, and a local cat now permanently attached to your leg. Congratulations, you've just experienced Egyptian date syrup. So let's take stock. You've slurped soggy beer bread, chewed fig bricks, munched on nutcakes shaped like gods, and glued your hands together with syrup. By now, your jaw is numb, your stomach is staging a protest, and yet, somehow, you're still curious. Because Egypt had one final trick. Food wasn't just for people. It was for gods too. And their divine snack tables. Oh, they put your honey bomb to shame. And trust me, what comes next makes your sticky festival fritters look like child's play. By now, you've eaten enough Egyptian snacks to make your stomach file a formal complaint. You've chewed gravel bread, honey bombs, tiger nut bricks, fig masonry, and you're still sticky with syrup. But here's the thing: ancient Egypt wasn't just about feeding people. It was about feeding gods and even the dead. Yes, snacks weren't only for the living. They were for eternity. Picture this. You walk into a temple courtyard at dawn. The air smells like incense and yesterday's beer. Priests bustle around, carrying trays piled high with bread, fruits, pastries, and meat. These weren't just meals. They were offerings. Every single morning, fresh food was placed in front of statues of gods. By evening, it was removed. Did the gods actually eat it? Not exactly. Egyptians believed they absorbed the essence, the leftovers, straight to the priest's dinner table. Talk about divine trickle-down economics. And these weren't boring leftovers. Oh no, offerings included honey cakes shaped like ankhs, sweet buns stuffed with dates, tiger nut pastries polished to perfection, and loaves of bread sculpted into snakes, birds, or cats. Imagine trying to pray while staring at a perfectly baked cobra loaf. Focus would be difficult. But temples weren't the only places where snacks mattered. Tombs were like eternal pantries. Egyptians believed that in the afterlife, you'd still get hungry. And the last thing you wanted was to show up before Osiris with an empty stomach. So tombs were stocked like ancient mini-fridges, only instead of Tupperware, you got baskets of dried figs, jars of honey, loaves of bread, salted fish, and, if you were rich, entire roasted ducks. King Tut's tomb. Archaeologists found over 40 jars of wine and loaves of bread still intact after more than 3,000 years. Imagine your grocery shopping lasting longer than most civilizations. That's some serious meal prep. And if actual food wasn't enough, Egyptians had backup. They packed tombs with little figurines called ashabtis, tiny servant statues whose job was to farm, cook, and fetch snacks for you in the afterlife. Basically, the world's first delivery service. Too tired to make your own eternal nut cake? No problem, Ashadi's got it. But here's the wildest part. They didn't stop at real food. They included models of bakeries, breweries, and butchers, just in case. Miniature food trucks for the underworld. It was snack insurance, ancient edition. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but what about the poor? They couldn't afford ducks and honey cakes. True. Most common folks had to settle for prayers, maybe a barley biscuit, and hope the gods were generous. But if you were wealthy, your tomb was basically an eternal buffet. Imagine heading into the afterlife with the ancient Egyptian version of an all-you-can-eat Costco run. And here's where it gets cosmic. The Book of the Dead, that big manual for navigating the afterlife, included spells specifically asking for unlimited snacks. Literally, some texts begged for 1,000 loaves of bread, 1,000 jars of beer, 1,000 oxen, and 1,000 fowl. That wasn't a prayer, that was a heavenly grocery list. So picture it. You die. You're mummified. You're buried with honey cakes, jars of beer, roasted ducks, and 1,000 tiny servant figurines. You wake up in the afterlife. And there it is, your eternal banquet. Loaves stacked like pyramids. Beer flowing like the Nile. Honey glistening like sunlight. And somewhere in the corner, a priest muttering, "Don't touch that Ra hasn't absorbed it yet." Honestly, not a bad deal. Eternal snacking beats eternal boredom. But here's the real kicker. Food wasn't just about feeding the stomach. It was about feeding the soul. To Egyptians, eating was connection between humans and gods, between life and death, between survival and celebration. Every honey cake, every date, every gritty loaf of bread carried meaning far beyond taste. And that obsession didn't die with Egypt. Because just over the horizon, another civilization was gearing up for its own epic festival, one that swapped honey cakes for fried dumplings, beer for fermented milk, and bread bricks for boiled mutton. And that brings us to the sweeping grasslands of Mongolia, where food, culture, and competition collided in a festival like no other. You've eaten your way through ancient Egypt's sticky, gritty, jaw-breaking snack menu. But now, we're leaving behind the pyramids and the Nile for something completely different. Picture this. Endless rolling grasslands under a sky so wide it feels like forever. Gehr's white felt tents dot the horizon like pearls on green silk. Horses thunder across the steppe, dust rising like smoke. And in the middle of it all, the biggest celebration in Mongolia, Naadam. Naadam isn't just a festival. It's Mongolia itself, condensed into 3 days of pure spirit. It's history, culture, and survival tied together with food, sport, and song. Outsiders see colorful costumes, horse races, and strange wrestling matches. Mongols see identity, resilience, and community. The word Naadam literally means games, but don't let that fool you. This isn't your neighborhood fair. These are the 3 manly sports: wrestling, archery, and horse racing. Skills that once made the Mongols the terror of Eurasia. Let's start with wrestling BD. There are no weight classes, no mats, no time limits. Just 2 men on a dusty field, wearing short open-chested jackets, briefs, and heavy boots. The goal? Make your opponent touch the ground with anything other than their feet or hands. Before each match, wrestlers raise their arms and flap them like eagles, an ancient ritual honoring the spirits of the steppe. The crowd roars, children chant, and somewhere, an elder mutters that this is exactly how Genghis Khan built an empire, one wrestling match at a time. Next up, archery, but don't picture paper bullseyes. These archers aim at tiny leather rings set on the ground dozens of meters away. Teams chant rhythmic encouragement as arrows whistle through the air. Men and women both compete, and when someone hits the target, the whole crowd erupts in song. It feels less like a sport and more like stepping onto a medieval battlefield where accuracy meant survival. And then horse racing. If wrestling is about strength and archery about precision, horse racing is about endurance. The riders? Children, some barely 6 years old, because they're light enough to give the horses speed. These little jockeys race across 20 kilometers of open grassland, clinging to their ponies as dust clouds rise behind them. The finish line is chaos, families cheering, elders singing, and mothers running to scoop up their kids. Win or lose, the horses are praised like heroes, draped in garlands and honored with songs. Now you're probably thinking, cool sports, but what about the food? Oh, don't worry. Nodam feasts are just as legendary as the games. Tables overflow with mutton, lamb, and goat. The centerpiece? Corcog chunks of meat cooked in a sealed metal pot with hot stones, releasing smoky steam that makes the whole steppe smell like heaven. Another star? Budog, an entire goat or marmot cooked from the inside out with scorching rocks stuffed in its cavity. When it's done, families gather, rip the meat apart with their hands, and pass it around. No forks, no knives, just fire, stone, and community. But meat isn't everything. Dairy is just as important. Bowls of arrowol, dried curds, sit on tables like crunchy snacks. Turag, a yogurt drink, cools the throat. And of course, the legendary Arag fermented Mare's milk. Sour, fizzy, slightly alcoholic, and deeply symbolic. To drink it is to taste the land itself. Hosts pour it freely, and refusing would be rude. One sip, and you're part of Mongolia. Street vendors thrive too. The smell of kushur fried meat-filled dumplings fills the air. Greasy, crispy, and perfect to grab between wrestling matches, they're the unofficial aroma of Nodam. Children dart past clutching fried bread. Elders sip salty milk tea, laughing as the games unfold. It's noisy, messy, and alive. Nodam isn't just competition, it's communion. Eating together is as important as wrestling or racing. To sit in a ger, tearing meat with your hands, sharing bowls of milk tea, is to affirm bonds of family, clan, and nation. Hospitality is relentless. You'll be offered food whether you're hungry or not. To refuse too firmly is almost an insult. By sunset, the steppe glows orange, fires crackle, and families gather in circles. Children still run around, sticky with honey from fried sweets. Teenagers flirt by the dumpling stalls, and old warriors lean back, sipping arag, remembering past Nodams. The festival is part chaos, part ritual, and all heart. But beyond the games and feasts, Nodam is something deeper. It's survival turned celebration. Mongolia is harsh winters freeze herds, winds cut like knives, and betrayal once came faster than sunrise. For centuries, life here wasn't guaranteed. But every summer, people gather, not as scattered families, but as one nation. They eat, they compete, they sing, and they remember. The steppe is hard, but Mongols endure. And just beyond the songs, smoke, and laughter lies a shadow, the figure who once united all these tribes, turned them into a war machine, and built the largest land empire in history. His name was Temujin. The world would remember him as Genghis Khan, and his story? It begins not with victory, but with betrayal, hunger, and a boy chasing survival across the unforgiving steppe. The fires of Naddam still blow on the steppe, but now the story shifts. Beyond the laughter, the dumplings, and the thunder of horses lies a boy who will change the world. His name? Temujin. The world would later tremble at the name Genghis Khan, but before he became the ruler of millions, he was just a hungry child in a dangerous land. Temujin was born around 1162 near the Anan River. His father, Jiazige, was a respected clan chief. His mother, Helan, was strong and wise, a woman who would carry her children through impossible times. For a brief moment, Temujin's life looked promising. He had a name that meant blacksmith, symbolizing strength and fire. Adin, Li, strength and fire. But destiny in the steppe was never gentle. When Temujin was about 9, his father took him to the Anjurat tribe to arrange a marriage. That was normal alliances through betrothal kept tribes alive. Temujin was promised to a girl named Bert, but while returning home, tragedy struck. Yesuge was poisoned by enemies. Suddenly, the family was leaderless, exposed, and vulnerable. What happened next was brutal. The clan, sensing weakness, abandoned Helen and her children. Just like that, they went from being the family of a respected leader to outcasts struggling to survive. Imagine it, a widow and her 7 children left on the open steppe with no protection, no herds, no allies, just hunger. Survival was desperate. They dug roots from the frozen earth. They trapped fish. They scavenged whatever they could find. Some sources even suggest they ate wild onions and small rodents just to stay alive. Hunger wasn't an occasional discomfort. It was a constant shadow, shaping their lives, sharpening their will. Temujin grew up in this crucible. He wasn't raised in luxury or safety. He was raised in betrayal, hardship, and the knowledge that no one was coming to save him. That kind of childhood doesn't break you. It forges you. But hardship didn't stop there. Even within his small family, rivalries burned. Temujin's half-brother, Bektar, tried to assert dominance over the siblings. Tensions grew, tempers flared, and one day it exploded. Temujin and his younger brother Kasar killed Bektar. Brutal? Yes. But for Temujin, it was survival. An early lesson that leadership on the steppe demanded decisiveness, even against your own blood. As Temujin entered his teens, he faced another blow. The tastiest tribe captured him, treating him as a slave. He was forced to wear a wooden collar that marked him as a prisoner. For days, he lived like this, humiliated, unable to move freely, constantly reminded of his weakness. But Temujin didn't stay broken. One night, he escaped with the help of a sympathetic guard. That escape wasn't just freedom, it was a turning point. From then on, Temujin would never accept chains again, literal or symbolic. Through all of this abandonment, hunger, betrayal, captivity, Temujin learned 2 things. Trust was fragile, and power meant survival. If you didn't lead, you were led. If you didn't strike, you were struck down. But even in the harshest times, Temujin wasn't alone. His mother, Helen, was his anchor. She reminded him of loyalty, of responsibility to his brothers, of the importance of unity. Her lessons balanced his ruthless survival instincts. She taught him that leadership wasn't just about force, it was about holding people together. And in the steppe, holding people together was harder than any war. Slowly, Temujin began rebuilding. He reconnected with Bert, his promised bride, and married her. That alliance brought him new allies, strengthening his fragile position. But challenges came swiftly. Rival tribes raided, allies betrayed, enemies circled. Temujin's family was kidnapped, stolen from, constantly tested. Each time he fought back, not always with victory, but always with persistence. It's easy to look at Genghis Khan as a conqueror, a destroyer, a legend carved in steel. But here, in these early years, he was something else entirely. A boy scraping roots from frozen dirt, a brother making hard choices, a prisoner breaking free. His empire didn't start with armies. It started with hunger. And that hunger never left him. Even when he had millions of warriors, even when he ruled more land than anyone in history, he carried the memory of starvation in his bones. That's why he fought not just for power, but for security, for a world where betrayal wouldn't leave his people starving. Temujin's rise wasn't fast. It was a slow, brutal climb, step by bloody step. But each wound, each loss, each hungry night shaped him into the man who would unite the steppe. And soon, that climb would turn into a storm. Because once Temujin learned how to gather allies, how to turn fractured tribes into one, the steppe itself would tremble. The boy who once dug roots for survival was about to become the man who commanded nations. The boy who scavenged roots on the steppe was gone. In his place stood a man who had tasted betrayal, slavery, and hunger, and learned to survive them all. Temujin was ready to do what no one else had managed for centuries: unite the fractious Mongol tribes. The Mongols weren't one people. They were dozens of clans, endlessly fighting each other. Alliances shifted like sand, broken by insults, rivalries, or a single stolen horse. Chiefs competed for power. Raids were constant. Trust was rare. For outsiders, the steppe looked chaotic. For those who lived there, it was just life. Temujin saw something different. He didn't want endless raids. He wanted stability, loyalty, and power, not for one family, but for a nation. And he was willing to break every tradition to get it. His first move was simple but radical: merit over blood. In Mongol society, loyalty usually flowed through kinship. But Temujin rewarded people not because they were relatives, but because they were loyal and capable. A shepherd who proved himself in battle could rise higher than a noble born into prestige. This idea was shocking, but it attracted ambitious warriors from everywhere. Men who had been ignored by their own tribes found a place under Temujin. Next, he built alliances with key clans. Some he gained through diplomacy, offering marriages, gifts, and protection. Others he won through war. He struck swiftly, punishing betrayal harshly, but rewarding loyalty generously. Word spread. Temujin was fair but terrifying. But his rise wasn't smooth. Rivals hated him. Old elites saw him as a threat. At one point, the tastiest tribe, the same people who once enslaved him, ambushed his camp, capturing Bert, his wife. For Temujin, this was personal. With help from allies, he waged war to rescue her, proving he could protect his family and punish enemies. That campaign cemented his reputation. He was not just a survivor, he was a leader worth following. And then came his army reforms. Traditional Mongol warfare was chaotic tribes charging with whoever showed up. Temujin reorganized it. He created strict units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000. Leaders were appointed based on loyalty and skill, not family ties. Discipline was enforced. Suddenly, the Mongols weren't just raiders. They were an army. He also enforced laws, known later as the Yasa. They punished theft, betrayal, and cowardice, but protected the weak and guaranteed religious freedom. The steppe had never seen anything like it. For the first time, there was a vision of order bigger than one clan. As his power grew, so did his enemies. At one point, a massive coalition of tribes, more than 30,000 warriors, united to crush him. Temujin had fewer men, but his discipline and organization carried the day. His troops fought in coordinated units, feigned retreats, and ambushed the enemy. Victory was total. The message was clear. Temujin was not just another warlord. He was destiny. In 1206, the moment came. On the banks of the Annan River, the Great Kurultai, a council of tribes assembled. Chiefs, warriors, shamans, and elders gathered to declare Temujin the supreme ruler of the Mongols. He was given a new name, Genghis Khan. It meant universal ruler. The ceremony was more than just politics. It was spiritual. Shamans invoked the eternal blue sky, the sacred force above all life, declaring that Genghis Khan ruled with divine blessing. For the first time in history, the Mongol tribes were united under one leader. And from that unity, an empire was born. Imagine standing there. You're one of his warriors, once just a poor herder, now part of something bigger than you ever dreamed. Around you are thousands of riders, banners snapping in the wind, drums pounding, shamans chanting. You see Temujin no, Genghis Khan on horseback, stern, unyielding, his eyes scanning the horizon as if he can already see the lands beyond. He tells you the future is yours to take, that the steppe is not a cage but a launching ground, that the eternal blue sky watches and under it you will conquer. You believe him, everyone does, because this isn't the boy who dug roots from frozen earth. This is the man who forged an army out of chaos, who turned betrayal into strength, who turned hunger into ambition. And soon, that ambition will ride across the world into China, Persia, Russia, and beyond. The steppe horseman, once ignored, will thunder into history as the most feared force the world had ever seen. But before the empire, before the conquests, there was still one thing left, proving to the world that Genghis Khan wasn't just a title. He was a storm, and the world was about to feel it. Because when the Mongols began to ride, no wall, no kingdom, no empire was safe. The year is 1206. The Mongols are united. The tribes that once fought each other now ride under a single banner, their eagle flags snapping in the wind. At their head is Genghis Khan, unyielding, merciless, visionary. The boy who once starved on the steppe now commands the greatest cavalry the world has ever seen. But uniting the Mongols was just the beginning. The world beyond the steppe was vast, rich, and unprepared for what was coming. Genghis didn't just want survival anymore. He wanted expansion. And so, the Mongols rode out not as raiders, but as conquerors. Their first great test came against China. To the south lay the Xia and Jin dynasties, wealthy, powerful states with fortified cities, armies of foot soldiers, and more resources than the entire steppe combined. By all logic, the Mongols nomads who lived in felt tents and ate dried curds should have stood no chance. But logic doesn't stop Genghis Khan. The Mongols moved with terrifying speed. Unlike the slow, lumbering Chinese armies, the Mongol cavalry could cover 100 kilometers in a day. They struck suddenly, appearing like ghosts, vanishing before counterattacks, then reappearing where least expected. City after city fell. When faced with fortifications, the Mongols adapted capturing Chinese engineers, forcing them to build siege engines, catapults, and towers. Within a decade, the Mongols, who had once relied on bows and horses alone, had mastered the art of siege warfare. And the brutality, legendary. Cities that resisted were annihilated, populations slaughtered, survivors enslaved. But those who surrendered often found the Mongols surprisingly pragmatic. Genghis wasn't interested in destruction for its own sake. He wanted obedience, tribute, and loyalty. If you gave him that, you might live. If not, your city became an example, burned into the memory of anyone thinking about resisting. From China, Genghis turned west to Persia. Here lay the Khwarezmian Empire, stretching from Iran to Central Asia. Rich cities, powerful armies, bustling trade routes. It should have been a formidable opponent. But it wasn't conquest Genghis sought at first. It was commerce. He sent a caravan of merchants to establish trade. Instead of welcoming them, the Khwarezmian Shah murdered them. Then, when Genghis sent envoys to protest, the Shah executed them, too, shaving their heads, humiliating them, and sending them back. That was a mistake. For Genghis Khan, envoys were sacred. Killing them was not just an insult. It was a declaration of war. And if there was one thing the Mongols excelled at, it was war. The invasion of Khwarezmia was devastating. The Mongols moved with precision, splitting their forces to strike multiple cities at once. They besieged Samarkand, Bukhara, and Urgench, wealthy cities filled with scholars, merchants, and soldiers. Mongol tactics were ruthless. They used feigned retreats, drawing defenders out of their walls. They diverted rivers to flood fortresses. They slaughtered entire populations to spread terror. When Bukhara fell, Genghis himself entered the city's mosque, looked at the trembling crowd, and declared, "I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." The message was clear: resist, and you face annihilation. But brutality wasn't the only weapon. The Mongols used intelligence networks, scouts, and spies to outmaneuver enemies. They adopted technologies from every land they conquered: Chinese siege engines, Persian administrators, Arab medicine. Every conquest made them stronger, smarter, more unstoppable. By the 1220s, the Mongol war machine was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Armies of horse archers could ride for days, each warrior carrying multiple horses to rotate. They struck in silence, unleashed storms of arrows, then vanished. Communication across vast distances was lightning fast, thanks to relay riders who could deliver messages across hundreds of kilometers in a single day. No empire could match their speed. And everywhere they went, fear rode ahead of them. Cities surrendered at the mere rumor of Mongol armies. Whole kingdoms submitted without a fight, preferring tribute to annihilation. For Genghis Khan, this was victory, not just through war, but through terror. But even as he conquered Persia and struck deep into China, Genghis never forgot the steppe. He always returned to his homeland, to the eternal blue sky. He lived in tents, ate simple food, drank arag with his warriors. He remained one of them, even as he became greater than any of them. That bond between ruler and people was his true strength. By the time his empire stretched from the Yellow River to the Caspian Sea, one thing was clear: Genghis Khan had become more than a man. He was a force of nature. The boy who had once scraped roots from frozen soil now commanded half the known world. And yet, even with all that power, even with armies at his back and nations at his feet, his hunger wasn't sated. The Mongols would ride further still into Russia, into Europe, into lands that had never even heard the word steppe, because for Genghis Khan, conquest wasn't just survival anymore. It was destiny. By the time Genghis Khan died in 1227, the world had changed forever. The hungry boy of the steppe, the outcast scraping roots to survive, had become the master of an empire that stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea. His armies had crushed dynasties, humbled empires, and redrawn the map of the medieval world. But his true legacy wasn't just conquest. It was survival elevated into destiny. At its height, the Mongol Empire became the largest contiguous empire in history. Under Genghis and his descendants, the Mongols controlled more land than Rome, more people than the caliphates, more trade routes than any other civilization before them. From China to Europe, the world felt the hoofbeats of Mongol horses. And yet, for all its brutality, the empire brought something unexpected: connection. The Silk Road, once fragmented and dangerous, was secured under Mongol rule. Caravans could travel from Beijing to Baghdad with relative safety, guarded by the same horsemen who had once burned cities. Trade flourished. Goods, ideas, and technologies flowed like never before. Gunpowder, printing, medicine, astronomy, and mathematics spread across continents. Even cuisines traveled: dumplings, noodles, spices, and sweets leapt from one culture to another, blending into new traditions. It's a strange irony. The Mongols, who lived on dried curds, boiled mutton, and fermented milk, ended up creating one of the greatest global food exchanges in history. But Genghis's legacy wasn't only about expansion. It was about the values he had learned in hardship. Loyalty mattered more than blood. Discipline mattered more than chaos. Merit mattered more than privilege. Those principles forged his army, his laws, his state, and they kept his empire alive long after his death. Even today, in Mongolia, his name is everywhere. Statues of Genghis Khan tower over city squares. Airports, vodka brands, universities. His legacy is stitched into the fabric of the nation. To Mongols, he isn't just a conqueror. He's the father of their identity, proof that a scattered people can unite, survive, and thrive. And when you think about it, his story isn't so different from those ancient Egyptians we left behind earlier. Egyptians turned gritty bread and swampy beer into the foundation of an empire. Mongols turned curds, mutton, and arag into the fuel of conquest. Both cultures took food, the simplest, most basic human need, and transformed it into something symbolic, something sacred, something that defined them. In Egypt, bread and beer weren't just meals. They were wages, offerings, and tickets to eternity. In Mongolia, milk and meat weren't just food. They were survival, strength, and the heartbeat of a nation that would ride across the world. It all circles back to hunger. The hunger of an Egyptian worker biting into a gritty loaf of bread as he stacked stones for a pyramid. The hunger of a Mongol child clutching a dumpling at Nadam as horses thunder across the steppe. The hunger of a boy named Temujin scraping roots from frozen earth, dreaming of something greater. Hunger is what drives us then and now. It shapes civilizations, forges empires, and inspires legends. It's the spark behind every loaf, every dumpling, every conquest. And maybe that's why these stories still grip us. Because deep down, whether we're eating honey cakes by the Nile or sipping salty milk tea on the steppe, we understand the truth. Food is never just food. It's survival, it's culture, it's power. So the next time you grab a snack, whether it's a bag of chips, a slice of pizza, or a late-night dumpling, remember, you're not just eating. You're taking part in the same ancient story that fueled pyramid builders, festival crowds, and the empire of Genghis Khan. A story of hunger, survival, and the endless human craving for more.